Welcome to the Chennai Grandmasters for a huge clash between Amin Tabatabaei with the white pieces and Indian superstar Erigaisi Arjun. We open with a classic Italian game, the Giuoco Piano. Both sides develop logically, building a solid and symmetrical position in the center. The early middle game is quiet and full of maneuvering. The players are probing, improving their pieces, and getting ready for the real fight to begin. And now we see the plans diverge. White expands on the queen side with b4, while black signals a direct assault on the king with g5. And right here, white makes a slight inaccuracy, giving black a clear target. A more cautious approach was needed. Knight to d2 was the stronger try, preparing for black's knight to e7, then knight to f1, and after knight to g6, white can play bishop to e3 from a more solid base. But in the game, white plays bishop to e3 immediately, and this bishop now becomes a beautiful target for black's attack. Erigaisi immediately punishes the inaccuracy, trading bishops and launching a pawn storm with g4 and h4. White tries to counter by breaking in the center with d4. A moment of calm as both sides reposition. The central tension is high and the knights reroute to better squares, but black's queen to f8 is a slip. The move misses the chance to play pawn to a5 for counterplay and actually hands the advantage over to white. White has a golden opportunity to seize a major advantage here, but fails to find the killer blow. The engine screams for pawn to c4. After pawn to g3, pawn to c5 follows, and after pawn takes f2 with check, the king simply recaptures and white is completely winning. But back in the real game, white plays knight to f1, a passive move that immediately gives back the entire advantage. The position is equal again. The battle now rages on the king side. Black's queen swings over to h6, pawns are traded, and the g-file is ripped open, pointing straight at the white king. White tries to distract black with a push on the queen side, but Erigaisi ignores it, calmly preparing to unleash a devastating attack. And here it comes. A brilliant sacrifice, bishop takes the pawn on h3. This shatters the pawn shield in front of white's king, clearing the way for black's heavy pieces. White has no choice but to accept the sacrifice, and black's knight immediately leaps into the attack, landing on g6. White's defense is under immense pressure, and this move is another inaccuracy. A better defensive try existed. Knight takes g3 was much tougher. After knight to f4, bishop to f1, king to d7, and rook to a2, white would actually be winning a pawn. But instead, white plays rook takes g3, and this allows black to continue a devastating forced sequence. And what a move! Knight to f4 is the key to the combination, the only move that keeps the winning attack alive, threatening to crash in on h3. White plays queen to e3, a natural move, but it's just not enough to stop the storm. Another brilliant sacrifice. Knight takes pawn on h3 with check, an absolutely stunning blow that completely demolishes white's defensive setup and forces the win of material. But what a find from Tabatabaei. A brilliant counter-sacrifice, rook takes the knight on h3. In a desperate position, this is the only move to complicate matters and avoid an immediate checkmate. Erigaisi will not be denied. Queen takes the rook on h3 is another brilliant move, flawlessly continuing the combination and liquidating into a completely winning endgame. The queen recapture on h3 is forced, but it's the last gasp for white. And rook takes the queen on h3, that's the end of the fireworks. The dust settles, and black is left with an extra rook for a bishop, a decisive material advantage. Now we enter the technical phase. Black is up the exchange and begins the methodical process of converting this winning endgame. White's only hope is to create some chaos with a passed pawn on the a-file, desperately trying to generate some counterplay, and black's pawn takes on a6 is a fantastic, precise move, neutralizing white's main threat completely. The point is, if white tries rook to b7 check, the king steps to f8, and after bishop to g2, rook to h6 simply wins a pawn. The endgame remains tense. White's rook is incredibly active, but black's pieces are working in perfect harmony, creating their own deadly threats. White harasses with checks, but black's king is safe, and the rook on a2 poses a huge problem. An excellent defensive move, knight to f3 is the only way for white to hold the position together for now. The idea is that if black plays rook to f6, white can push the pawn to a7, and after knight takes d5, pawn takes d5 wins back some material. White desperately tries to force a draw by repetition with a series of rook checks, but Erigaisi's king expertly sidesteps to continue the fight. And that is the final, decisive mistake. White's position was difficult, but this move makes it completely lost. The only way to hold on was rook to d7. After pawn takes e4, rook takes d6 check, king to g7, and another check on d7 keeps the position tenable. But after the move in the game, bishop to f1, white loses all control, and black now has a clear path to victory. And pawn takes e4 is the perfect punishment, a great move that rips open more lines for black's attack and creates unstoppable threats. White tries to form a blockade with bishop to c4, but it's far too little, too late. What a fantastic move. Rook to c2 is the only way to win, and it coordinates the attack perfectly. The threat is unstoppable. After a check on a8, pawn takes the knight on f3, rook to f check, and king to g6 will win a piece. Rook to d7 is another slip, and the defense is now completely collapsing under the pressure. The rook swings over to h3, and now the knight on f3 is doomed. And king to e3 is an inaccuracy that just makes black's job easier. The king walks right into the fire. There it is. Pawn takes the knight on f3 is the final nail in the coffin. A great move that wins a piece and ends all resistance. A desperate check from white is met by black's king marching up the board to f5, itself becoming a powerful attacking piece. And this final check is a blunder that only speeds up the end. White was lost anyway, but there was a more stubborn defense. Knight to f2 was the best try, and after knight to g2 check, king to d3, rook takes the knight, and king to c3, white could struggle on. But in the game, knight takes d6 check just walks into a forced sequence that loses even more material. And king to g6 is a fantastic winning move. The only move that wins on the spot, perfectly positioning the king for the final assault. Here's the beautiful point. If rook to g7 check, the king simply takes the rook. After king to e4, the pawn pushes to f2, and that wins the other rook. In a hopeless position, white makes one last mistake. There was a slightly better way to go down. Rook to d8 was more resilient. After rook to e2 check, bishop takes, pawn takes with check, and king to d2. White is still losing material, but it takes longer. However, after bishop to f1, the game ends immediately with a decisive check, and rook to e2 check is the final blow, a great move that forces a series of trades into a trivially won endgame, and white resigns. What a game! A quiet opening exploded into a brilliant sacrificial attack from Erigaisi Arjun, who navigated the complications with incredible precision to secure the victory. Black wins. Tabatabaei resigned here, because the position is completely hopeless. Here's what he saw. Bishop takes the rook on e2. The pawn recaptures with check. The king moves to d2. Rook to d3 is another check, and after king to c2, black is simply up a rook and a knight for nothing.